The James Show Podcast.
Dart is facing some real challenges here, and it's now Plano raised their head and said they're going to have a meeting on whether or not they put Dart on the ballot to be repealed, to be kicked out of Plano, which I thought is awesome. Since they said that, Farmers Branch has raised their hand. They're like, hey, that sounds like a good discussion we want to have. Highland Park raised their hand and said, don't leave us out. So do we have really a full-fledged Dart revolt happening in North Texas? A long overdue revolt against one of the most embarrassing and expensive failures in civil engineering history, Dallas Area Rapid Transit. Here's the report from WFAA.
Bound Shiloh now arriving track 1.
Dart's days-old Silver Line has trouble on the tracks ahead.
Breaks my heart that these actions are being taken.
The head of the transit agency calls it devastating, the move by 3 member cities to consider elections to leave Dart. Plano, Farmers Branch, and Highland Park will decide next week whether to put withdrawal on the May ballot.
It's been a long time coming, but it's the right move for the city to make.
Plano Republican State Rep Matt Shaheen says it's about fairness, pointing to a study saying cities like Plano put millions more into Dart than they get back in services.
When you're talking about taxpayers at the end of the day,
Dart calls that study flawed and says it doesn't take into account the Silver Line, which just opened this weekend here in Plano. And if Plano votes to leave the system, it means that stations like this one won't be open even a full year.
And I understand that a lot of people, a lot of people would want sort of a dollar in and dollar out, but that's just not the way things work.
Losing 3 cities will also likely mean cuts to services in the ones that remain, Dart says, potentially as soon as the day after a vote in May.
the city of Plano is paying over $100 million into DART. They can take a fraction of those dollars and provide services to those same individuals that rely on public transportation. We're not going to forget about them.
But DART says it worries about people from other cities who rely on transit but won't get a vote.
I'm really heartbroken mostly for the riders because I think the riders who are impacted, I don't believe have a voice in this right now.
As DART faces a fork in the road. In Plano, I'm Cole Sullivan.
Several member cities have also pushed to cut how much money they contribute to DART. During this year's legislative session, lawmakers considered a bill that would have changed DART's funding and governing structure, but it never made it out of the House.
Okay, so now let's start talking about this DART situation here. Because DART has been built on a throne of lies. That's where DART sits right now. If you go back to 1983, this is where you need to start the DART story, because this is where the DART story started. In 1983, when DART was just a fantasy that was presented to the voters in North Texas, they were handing out brochures. They didn't have websites yet, but they were having public meetings. And in their written plan, they were promising you, but by at this point, DART would only have about 25 to 35 employees. There'd be 450,000 riders. 50% of the operating costs would be covered by the fare box, and there would be 147 miles of rail by 2010. They would never borrow money. In fact, they were legally forbidden from borrowing money, so how's it going to happen? And they would also not throw that cost off onto the federal government. There were no federal government subsidies, except for maybe, HOV lanes that the buses would use. And they also said there would be significantly reduced traffic congestion. So where are we at now? According to DART's website and financial reports, they are, instead of 25 to 35 employees, 3,800 employees. The fare box does not cover 50% of the operating costs. It covers less than 10% of just the salaries. They have only 93 miles of rail in 2025 instead of 147 miles of rail by 2010. And not only did they break their promise to not borrow money, they owe $3.8 billion. When I say they, I mean you, taxpayers in North Texas, owe $3.8 billion on DART's behalf. And, of course, they also broke the promise to not get federal subsidies. They've applied for federal subsidies. They've received billions from the federal government. So this is a big boondoggle that was built on lies, that didn't live up to any of its promises. And it's finally being challenged. A 2023 study, I saw this in the Dallas Express, a 2023 study said Plano gives $109.6 million in sales taxes to DART, but receives only $44.6 million in services. So they're just flushing $65 million down the train tracks there, and they can't see any return on it. Now, you could say that's a flawed study, but that'd have to be an incredibly flawed study. Someone is losing money on this deal. But how bad does it have to be? The average people in Plano that are willing to go to the ballot box in an off-year election, can we get a plurality of them to vote this down? Because once Plano steps aside, Farmers Branch, Highland Park, they're probably going to step aside too. What's left to hold it up? 800-288-9227. Coming up next, Shelby Williams, a guy who's been fighting against DART, formerly on the Plano City Council, now running for Collin County County Commissioner. One of the reasons why I hate it so much is because I had to write it for a few months. And I realized what a terrible, terrible lifestyle that we're trying to force people into. And there's people who are constantly trying to incentivize you to take public transportation, take the bus, take the train, you ride a bike lane, reduce your carbon footprint, save the planet. Oh, no, that's terrible, bro. It's terrible. I mean, do you even think about the lifestyle you're forcing people into? Anyway, my next guest is one of the few people who probably hates DART maybe as much as I do, Shelby Williams. He was a Plano City Councilman, and now he's running for Collin County Commissioner. Welcome to the James Show, Shelby.
Thanks so much, James. It's good to be on.
So what's the likelihood that this vote could even happen? What's the Plano City Council look like, the people that are going to decide whether or not they put it on the ballot? When they have this meeting next week, do you think that there's a chance that they could put a referendum out there?
I think it's probably a likelihood. Otherwise, this meeting would not have been called. Obviously, it has not been called in some of the member cities, but 3 member cities called meetings yesterday after years and years of trying to work with DART. So the fact that the meeting has been called, I think there's an excellent chance that the council will vote to have the referendum and put it on the ballot and get the voters of 2026, give the voters of 2026 the chance to weigh in on this, which they have not had since 1983.
So when we talk about putting it on the ballot, would this be on the one that is next November in 2026?
I believe it's going to be on the May ballot. This would be a local election in May. Local elections are generally held in May, but we don't have one scheduled for the city of Plano next year.
So you mean in like 7 months?
That's correct. But don't quote me on whether that would be May or November. I believe May, but I'm not 100% on that.
Well, wouldn't that be a good thing? Because the smaller and less popular an election is, the easier you can get the result you want.
Depending on who's working it hard. And we know, because we have observed this for several years, that DART is spending gobs of our tax money to protect and preserve itself. When we've gone to the state legislature for 3 sessions in a row now, 3 legislative sessions in a row, first, just to try to get some simple fiscal transparency. I made the request back started in 2019, but we made the formal request in 2020 to just understand how much money DART is spending for the benefit of the people of Plano. We know to the penny how much we're putting into the DART system. That's half our sales tax and half the 2-cent sales tax that the city gets. But they wouldn't tell us how much they actually spend in Plano. They said they don't track that. I'm sure they don't. Then it would be subject to an open records request. So we went to the state legislature asking for a simple fiscal transparency bill. Just tell us what's being spent. And DART fought it. They wanted it pulled. They promised to give us the information if I agreed to let them pull the bill. I said, okay, if I get the information. And it never came. It just never came. And so the second session, the same fiscal transparency bill went back through the legislature. It passed the Senate. It was killed in House committee. And once again, DART said they fought the bill tooth and nail, brought all of their guns to bear and said, no, we'll work with Plano. We want a local solution to this. We understand their concerns. We'll work with them. And the moment the legislative session was over, poof, it evaporated. So this last legislative session this year, a bill went through not just asking for simple fiscal transparency, because in the meantime, we finally got some fiscal transparency in the EY study. $1 million was spent on that study.
When you say EY,
what DART was spending.
Is that Ernst & Young? Okay.
Yes. And so DART fought it again, tooth and nail, and said, well, we want a local solution to this. We think the best solution is for the local member cities to come to an agreement. And once again, the moment the legislative session was over, DART left the field. They hopped the train and ran away. So I likened this. I chaired a meeting of the member cities last year to discuss these issues. And I likened this to Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown. And year after year, time after time, we keep running at the ball with Lucy promising that she's going to hold it steady, and then she yanks it away and Charlie Brown falls flat on his back. Well, these special meetings are the signal that Charlie Brown is not going to take another crack at the football. Lucy's had her chance, and enough is enough.
All right, Shelby Williams, who are these people that are fighting against DART? Are these just individual citizens, or is this like they're a hero movement? What is this?
No, this is the cities. I mean, once we started the effort in Plano years ago just to understand what was spent, and that study, that Ernst & Young study, told us what everybody knew already. It just allowed us to quantify it, that most of the money that DART gets is not wisely spent. And it's Plano is a huge subsidizer of the DART system. So you cited $109 million. That was a snapshot, 1 cent of sales tax in 2023. $109 million went straight to DART. Well, we're expected to pay almost $120 million to DART this coming fiscal year, just because sales tax collections increase year over year on average. And that's more money than Plano residents pay in property taxes. It's just going straight to DART vis-a-vis their sales taxes. That's more money than the entire Plano Police Department.
All right, hang on. Let's say that part again and really slow. The taxpayers of Plano pay more to DART for a system that almost nobody in Plano uses than they pay in aggregate property taxes?
That's right. And that's residential property taxes. That's not counting commercial. But Plano residents, I'll say it again slow, Plano residents, you pay more of your tax dollars to DART through your sales tax than you pay in property taxes to the city of Plano.
So one of the hard answers I've tried to find is how many people actually use DART, and because I want to find out the cost per user. And you know, they pad the stats to say, well, you know, 2 million people took a ride on DART. Well, what if it's the same guy who operates on DART, just uses DART for his commute, and you know, 250 rides go to one person? Do you have some more solid numbers on how much people actually use DART?
It's hard to say because it's an open system. They don't actually have gates where they control ticketing or anything, but they claim DART's ridership. And actually, this is telling as well. 2019, when I started inquiring, DART's ridership was claimed at 69,076,000 riders for the year.
No way.
And that's based on individual rides. Somebody gets on a bus once, and then that's counted as a ride.
Yeah, there's not 69 million people in Texas.
No, that's throughout the entire year. That's everybody in and out on a bus, on a train. So you might have with multiple connection points, which you have to use usually on DART because it's not an efficient system. A person can be counted as 6 riders per day, 3 connections on their way to where they're going, 3 on the way back. But they claimed 69 million in 2019. Well, then the pandemic happened. And even in 2023, after we've recovered from that, we're only at 48,800,000 riders. That's just 70% of the pre-pandemic levels. But in the meantime, DART's getting 135% of the money. So they collected $621 million in 2019, but $834 million in 2023.
I hate to consider myself a guy who hates DART. That sounds so negative. I like to think of myself as a friend of the North Texas taxpayer, Shelby.
It's essentially what I've been fighting for years now. And I won't say I hate DART. I lament what DART has become. Back in the day, or more than 40 years ago, when DART was created by Texas state statute, it served a purpose for the Metroplex of 40 years ago. But DART has not evolved with the Metroplex, and it does not serve the people it was meant to serve, or it serves them very poorly. And rakes in exorbitant amounts of tax dollars to do so. It's just wasteful. So I think friend of the taxpayers is a great way to put it. And quite honestly, a friend of those who need public transit, because those who do need it are getting a substandard, subpar transit system for their money and all of our money. And DART could be doing so much better. What we've actually asked for, in addition to fiscal transparency, is a system that works, that makes sense for 2024, 2025, and beyond, that best serves the needs of the people who actually need it, and does so in a fiscally responsible manner.
Okay, so how do we make sure, is there anything the people listening, the people of Plano, can do to make sure that the city council agrees to put it on the ballot next year? Is there anything they can do to make sure that ballot initiative wins next year?
A couple things. First, we've got 3 cities who have called meetings next week. We've got Plano, of course, and then both Farmers Branch and Highland Park have also called meetings. But you asked earlier about who's leading this effort. We have a coalition of cities, 7 cities, including Plano and Irving, that have been asking for transparency and reform for years now. So this is both grassroots, meaning average taxpayers and voters, as well as city leadership, elected officials in several of the DART member cities. There are 13 member cities. And I expect that more are probably going to call meetings as well, because, like I said, we have been trying so hard, time and again, to get DART to come to the table, and we faced a lot of empty promises. So the very first thing, for not just people of Plano, but for Farmers Branch, Highland Park, and other cities like Irving and Carrollton, ask your elected representatives, your city council members, this is a city council decision, ask your city council members to say, enough is enough. We've tried. We need a better solution. DART is not going to offer it. If they ever were, they would have done so by now. It is best to just leave the system. We can see to our transit needs ourselves. Getting it on the ballot is the first hurdle. The city councils have to call that referendum. Then we shift to the actual election. That has to be a groundswell movement, because DART has pulled out all the stops and deployed all the tactics to fearmonger and scare people. A good instance is when we were talking about in the last legislative session, a bill for fiscal reform to allow member cities to get up to 25% of what they put into DART back to put into their own mobility solutions. Even when it was scaled down to 5%, the bone that DART was going to throw them, the first thing they wanted to cut was paratransit services. So like you're taking the population that needs DART maybe the most and then saying, nope, you don't get it anymore. Go complain to your city councils. Tell them to stop barking up this tree. So it's a tactic. And I would urge city council members and citizens alike who come to vote for this, DART's going to make a lot of promises, because they have before, and they've broken every single one of them for almost 6 years now. I would urge city councils and citizens to not fall for it again. We tried. We really tried. DART served a purpose once. It was created with a model where they get half the sales tax from the member cities in the world of 1983. When Plano's citizens back in the day had the referendum to give half our sales tax to get DART service, half our sales tax was Cullen Creek Mall.
Right.
Roughly.
Right.
We live in a radically different Plano now. Many of the member cities are very different, but we're locked into that same old model, which just no longer works. So spread the word to your voters out there. Spread the word that the time has come, that we really tried. We went to bat numerous times. The time has come to get out of this system and stop feeding a machine that I believe exists only to serve itself now. And let people know the facts. Like in Plano, residents, you pay more to DART, whether you write it or not, than you do in property taxes. That should wake everybody up. And you pay more to DART. DART gets more of your money than the entire Plano Police Department does. We fund DART from Plano tax money better than the Plano Police Department. Imagine what we could do if we recouped that money. And you asked about ridership numbers.
Right.
When I kept pressing and pressing and pressing. We finally got a report. It was a fluff piece. I told DART CEO herself it was a fluff piece, extolling the virtues of DART. Didn't actually answer the question, didn't say how much was spent in Plano, but provided a lot of numbers. One of the charts in there was math I could use. It showed the ridership, peak times, average, et cetera. And I calculated based on DART's own data that we could provide transit for all those folks for half the cost of what we pay into DART just by getting them all free Uber. Now, I don't think that free Uber is an effective public transit solution, but it just showed how upside down it was. And that's using DART's own data, remember.
So I tried to do a similar calculation, and it came down to, my rough guess was it was about $6,000 per rider per year. And so that's $500 a month. You could get someone a pretty recent Toyota Corolla for that instead of, all these trains and these tracks and these buses and all this other stuff. All right, Shelby, I'm out of time, but I really appreciate the assist here because I hate DART with the hot heat of 1,000 suns, and the idea that it might be able to finally be put to bed just gets me kind of excited. So I appreciate it, sir.
You bet. Thanks a lot, James.
Is this your website, Shelby H. Williams?
ShelbyHWilliams.com. That's right, ShelbyHWilliams.com.
This is Brian in Dallas. You're on WBAP.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go, Brian.
All right. So, me personally, I feel like if DART shuts down, basically going to cut down access to, a bunch of things. I'm 20. I used to use DART all the time to get to school because, it was the only way I could go to school and, all that stuff. If DART shuts down, you're also cutting down access to kids who probably use it as well to go to school. And that's one of the main issues that I'm seeing right now is if it gets kicked to the curb, like you said, how are some kids going to be able to access to school on time and properly?
Brian, I would guess something to the order of 95% of school students don't have access to public transportation systems, and they still make it to school. Where I lived growing up, we didn't have public transportation, so somehow I still made it to school without public transportation. Where my kids and I live now, they don't have access to public transportation. Somehow they still make it to school. Brian, the idea that we need to spend billions of dollars on public transportations or kids aren't going to be able to make it to school is ridiculous. It's silly. In fact, it's the exception. The norm is kids making it to school without public transportation.
I mean, what's it called?
A dad? Is that what you're asking for? A dad?
What do you mean?
Well, because that's who took me to school. And, on Mondays, I take my kids to school.
Exactly. I never really had parents who could take me to school because, they'll be working 6 in the morning until 8 in the afternoon.
Sure. All right. How about we send you a school bus and we cancel DART and we just send a school bus instead?
I mean, the school bus really falls on the education system. And since they're also cutting that too, there's nothing a lot of people can do.
But Brian, how do you explain this thought pattern for people who live in rural areas? Do you think they all deserve a publicly financed ride to school?
I mean, yeah, everybody deserves access to school just because they live out a little farther than they should be.
Okay, so how do people in the country do it, but people in the city can't?
I mean, it just depends.
Because they're adults and they figure it out. The truth is you don't need DART to make sure kids go to school. Almost everywhere in America gets their kids to school without a public transportation system, Brian. Man, I really thought I'd get through to you before the phone call was over. This is Ryan in Dallas. You're on WBAP.
I especially liked the show yesterday on the expose of Ozempic and stuff. But anyway, poor DART. Remember the West End, how, it was just a shining jewel. And now...
hang on. You mean the West End area in downtown Dallas that had the big mall and everything? Yeah, I'm not sure everyone knew that reference that you were making there. But yeah, there used to be the 6-story mall with the arcade on the bottom. There was a Planet Hollywood there, and Sylvester Stallone was there when it opened up. And there was the Dick's Last Resort across the street. And it was a scene, man. Toadies played a concert there after the Stars won the Stanley Cup. Oh, no, I remember the West End Mall in the West End area. What do you...
Some true sacred cows there, like the old spaghetti warehouse and this, that, the other. So anyway, there's this huge rail hub right next to it. It's called West End Station. And you have to run the gauntlet of all these upturned palms of the homeless going in and going out.
I walk past that all the time, and it is terrible. It is the worst place that I have to walk through on a regular basis. Well, we work not far from there. We work just a few blocks from there. So if I'm going to go meet some people downtown, like if people are like, hey, meet me at Frankie's when you get off work, or there's a happy hour, or there's an open mic night or something. Yeah, I often have to walk through that station at night. And that's what the train brings in.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, anyway, I think DART is Dallas's canary in the coal mine. And Dallas is just a poorly run big city. And this is an exponent of it. So, anyway, stay there and pitch.
Well, look, I will, but, I think DART is the opposite of the canary in the coal mine. If we can snuff this canary out ourselves, that shows us that we actually do better than most big cities, that we recognize failed big boondoggle programs that persist in other cities. Because they have the same issue with the public transportation garbage in New Orleans. In fact, New Orleans might be even dumber because they have all the streetcars that are absolutely useless, but they're so cute and they look like New Orleans, and they just flush money down the toilet every bit as bad as we do. But this is something that I find confounding because it's a huge embarrassing failure everywhere it's tried, but every other city, once they get to a certain size, they're like, hey, we need to do that. And my question is, why? Where has this worked? Where has it not been a drain on the taxpayers? Where has it actually lived up to its expectations? I'm just shocked that these public transportation problems persist when we have this much information on them. This is Kenneth and Grapevine. You're on WBAP. Kenneth and Grapevine. Going once, going twice.
I got you, buddy.
Okay, go, Kenneth. Me? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I'm a retired VA employee, and I did ride the DART for a while. It was convenient because the government paid for my ticket, and I live out in the Colleyville area, so I'd have to go down to catch the TRE and then take that all the way downtown Dallas and then ride it on down into Cliff area there where the VA is in Dallas. I was an accountant there. Well, at any rate, it got to be where the crime was getting so bad. I had my phone stolen from me a couple of times. You have these thugs on there. And I mean, I know that the crime is really going up nowadays. And of course, living out here in the Grapevine, Colleyville area, the A train runs out here. Now, I never see anybody ever riding that thing. It's like, what are we paying money for this? So I'm really against paying a lot of money for something that really doesn't get utilized and is not very safe.
Well, and what is really the philosophical backing for all these terrible ideas? And one of the big pushers of this is climate change. We've got to reduce our carbon footprint. We can't have all these people driving their own cars and creating all this CO2. We need to cram them into these more efficient systems. And it feels like, this rush to make a smaller carbon footprint or reduce CO2 emissions, that's one of the big drivers of these terrible ideas. And that's why California is so big on it and lefties are so big on it. They love trains. They love cattle cars. They love these big infrastructure projects. And a lot of the misleading motivation for these horrible failed ideas is this idea that creating CO2 is destroying the earth and we got to save the planet. This is Al in Garland. You're on WBAP.
Hello.
Hey, Al, go.
I just wanted to advocate for the people because I grew up in a single parent home, 105, and going to school, I had to walk about 2 miles, and I just knew people that had to catch the bus or the train. And I took it going to college, and, there's just a lot of people that take it. And I think getting rid of it, there's pros and cons both ways. And so.
Well, there's not a whole lot of pros. And I'm not saying that there's zero pros. I'm saying the cons far outweigh the pros. Because people call in every time this comes up and they're like, well, listen, I used it one time and it was kind of helpful. And I'm not saying DART never helps anyone at any time. But let me put it to you like this. What if I taxed you $300 on your next check and I gave you a pepperoni pizza in exchange? Would you think that's a good program?
No.
All right. Now, Al, how would you feel if you went on the radio and you're like, we need to cut this pizza program? And then someone calls in and they're like, yeah, but I was hungry one day and the program gave me a pizza. And so I don't know how I would eat without the pizza program. Does that make sense? That's my metaphor.
Yeah,
that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, but I feel like as the government or whatever that controls it, they or the city council, whatever, that there are things that they should do for the people that just might not always make sense, but make sense.
No, I don't agree with any of that. There are very limited things that the government should do for the people, and making sure they have a ride from point A to point B doesn't factor into my calculus anywhere.
Okay.
Well, look, I don't think they're supposed to put up impediments to you going from point A to point B. I don't even mind them making roads so you can take your own damn car from point A to point B. But they're not supposed to be the people that provide you with the transportation at public cost.
True. But, like somebody like me with my license suspended, it's like one of few options that I can do,
Okay, but all right, Al. Also think from my point of view, where I come from, a small town where there is no public transportation in any of those towns, in those medium-sized towns, in the larger towns. This is just a phenomenon that happens in the big city. We have poor people out there. We have people with suspended license. We have people that are going to school. We have people with working parents. We have people that are going to college. And somehow we can all figure out how to get our butts from point A to point B without a giant, expensive, top-down government program.
That is true, because I do have to figure it out sometimes.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being that open-minded about it. Thank you very much for your call. That's Alan Garland, everybody. This is Elizabeth in Electra. You're on WBAP.
Hey, I'm calling for, I guess, several reasons. One, I don't know if it was DART or it was supposed to connect to DART. I know there was like 2 or 3 articles over here. Since my family and I have lived in the area here in Wichita Falls at the Times Record, there was talking about connecting a rail from all that was supposed to go through Wichita Falls, go all the way from Boulder, Colorado, or Aurora, or somewhere in Colorado, to Dallas to connect to DART, and so people could travel back and forth. And I'm like, oh, no. 2 reasons. Just like you said, these government-run ones, they're not nice. They're substandard. They don't. You have to jump off of one bus and or train and walk to another station, and it's not seamless and efficient like it should be. For one, it's not privately owned. A private company would do way better. And then 2, we don't want the crime that's in Dallas out here. I don't, anyway. And that's really why my family and I live here as opposed to closer to Dallas-Fort Worth, because, one, we had a chance to move there, and I chose not to because of the crime. And so I really, I hope we find a way to get some organizations or somebody or a private company, or maybe some group of people will create a private company that will provide something like this. Like maybe you can get.
Oh yeah, now Elizabeth,
workers or something.
I don't know. Maybe you've heard me talk about this in a previous show, but I really haven't mentioned it in a while, so I'm glad you brought it up. I'm not against private public transportation, if that makes sense. I'm not against those tracks being there, and if a private sector company wants to buy its own trains at its own expense and charge its own fares and, use the infrastructure that way, I'd be in favor of that. Same thing with buses. We could have private buses. Just leave the bus stops there, abolish DART, and if some guy wants to go get it probably won't be a big, long bus. It'll probably be a minivan or one of those church vans that has like 4 rows, seats like 13 kids. Remember going to church camp in those? Some guy wants to drive around and give people rides like that, but you know what you have to do? You have to deregulate a lot of stuff, which would make me happy, but people out there who think there's a government solution for everything would probably scoff at that. But no, private sector alternatives, I'm very open-minded about that. And one of the reasons I know I say that with a smile is because they're all not going to be profitable. There's a reason they don't exist already. The market was right. You just don't like the result.
The James Show Podcast.